Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast, a show about people who share their personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, most authentic lives. I'm your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. More about Career Minds after the show. Today, I am excited to bring you Shelly Azen, Chief Human Resource Officer turned entrepreneur. I met Shelly years ago in the HR circles of Philadelphia. Her company became a valued client of Career Minds as they were experiencing restructuring and layoffs. Shelly had to get out and ultimately took a severance package and used our outplacement services. This ultimately led to Shelly launching her own HR consulting company called unHR, which she explains how she got the name in the show. Shelly describes her amazing story from corporate HR to taking the leap of faith and starting her new company. 7 years later, unHR is thriving as the fastest growing company in the Philadelphia area. So without further ado, please enjoy Shelly Azen and her clocking out story. Shelly, welcome. It's nice to see you this morning.
Hi, Raymond. You as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was reflecting this morning and I was thinking back when you left the corporate world and you started your company unHR, and it's been 7 years already. I was reading an article this past week by FreshBooks, and the title of it was, "When do you know that your business is going to be successful?" And it's so interesting because they had two inflection points. There's the 3-year mark where you hit a point where that could be break even. But then they said the 7-year mark is when you know, like that's when generally a company has hit their stride and you're a business. And I know this past year you celebrated winning the top fastest growing companies in the Philadelphia region, which congratulations. That's
Thank you.
Easy task. And we're going to jump into the business and what that's all about, but just so excited for all of your success to this point, and just been following you on social media, and I feel like you're everywhere these days. And so just kudos to all of your success to this point.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I've known you a long time. And so that means a lot to me. And it's nice to know that people pay attention to your social media.
Oh my gosh.
Which we could probably talk about later. It's like you sometimes don't know what's working and what isn't working. But good to know about the 7-year mark. Yeah, it feels really good to be here at this moment. So thank you.
Yeah, I have to share that article with you. It's I think it came out just a week ago. So what we typically do is I'd like to just start from the beginning. Tell me where you're from, where'd you grow up, what was home life like, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So most people who know me know I am from Pittsburgh. I am a very proud black and gold card carrying member,
Nice.
i.e. that means fans of the Steelers. So grew up in was what I would just say is a working class family, which I think back then is really what Pittsburgh was known for. My parents were young parents. My dad had one job for 50 years. He worked at the H.J. Heinz Company, which was a massive employer in Pittsburgh for decades. I should take that back. He had more than one job. He had one employer. He worked his way up over those 50 years. I have a younger brother. My mom did not work outside the home. And so we have a really nice, close-knit family. My parents are still with us. My brother and his wife live in Pittsburgh with their kids. I go back often to be a part of the family, not just like this distant aunt who lives in Philadelphia now. And so, I have a really close relationship with my family, and I'm super proud of that and very thankful for it.
So is there any tension now that you've been in Philadelphia for quite a while, and that's how you and I have gotten to know each other through the circle here? But that 4.5 hour drive from Pittsburgh to Philly, and now that you're in Eagles Nation, like what is that? Does you go back home and is it sort of like you're a traitor?
No, well, it'll be 21 years. You're right, 21 years in August, so coming up soon. When I go home, people remind me and ask me, like, are you still an Eagles fan? So 21 years later, I still hear that question. And the answer is a resounding no.
Right. A resounding hell no.
And if you, exactly. And if you see me at the gym or, out running or walking, you'll see I have some sort of black and gold on at all times, a Steeler hat or a Steeler t-shirt or something related to sort of the black and gold and Steel City. So very proud of it. And so in fact, when I moved here, my nephew was 4 months old when I moved here, meaning Philadelphia. My nephew was 4 months old, and my brother basically threatened me and said, if you come home with anything green and white or orange and black flyers, you will never see your nephew for the rest of your life. And so, it runs deep. The love of the black and gold runs deep in my family for sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I have to ask about your dad working at a company for 50 years, knowing your background, what type of, impression did that make on you as a kid growing up, just seeing that level of commitment with one company? And I just wonder how that impacted you growing up.
Yeah, I think it's broader than that. But, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, my parents were young parents when they had a family and got married. They were teenagers. And as I also mentioned, my mom didn't work outside the home. So that meant that my dad picked up every side job on the weekends as well. My dad is an electrician. He was trained to be an electrician. And so he picked up side jobs on the weekends. And so what I saw was someone who worked really hard for his family outside the home. My mom, of course, was sort of the inside the home in charge, right? And so she had her roles and responsibilities with raising my brother and I. And what I just saw was that people who really loved their children and loved their family and cared about giving their kids an opportunity to be better and do better than what they had. And for my parents, that meant getting a good education because my parents, as I said, were very young. They didn't go to college. They started their family young. And my dad just believed that education was your ticket to an easier life, meaning you didn't have to labor. You didn't have to, use your body and physically labor like he did to earn a living. And so we talked at the dinner table just about, without really, I think, him saying the words, it was the understanding of watching him work hard and pick up extra jobs and put in a hard day's work and talk about work at the dinner table. And what I heard him say was how much he cared about what he was doing and how much he cared about doing a good job. My dad was an electrician at a giant food factory. And so our phone would ring at 2:00 in the morning when a machine went down and no one knew how to fix it. They would call our house. And so for years, I would just pick up the phone and they would say, hey, Shelly, is your dad there? And, my dad would pick up the phone in his bedroom. And so what I just saw was a lot of dedication and commitment and a really, really high caliber work ethic, and all for the benefit of ensuring that his kids had a good life and that we had opportunities that he and my mom did not have.
Did they have any influence on your choice of what you were going to pursue in college? How did that come about in terms of you figuring out what your major was going to be and what did that look like?
Yeah, I remember, I was an athlete growing up. I wasn't good enough to play in college. I did pursue a couple of those conversations, but they just didn't work for me. And I think my dad really wanted me to stay local. As I look back now, I'm sure the conversations felt different, but my dad wanted me to be local. I think he was just afraid of the outside world when his whole life was within a 5-mile radius. He lived and worked in the same community that he grew up in for 50 years. And so I know now what I needed then was to sort of spread my own wings and go do my own thing. And so I went to school about 2 hours away. I wanted to be a physical therapist. And then I realized the first semester I was really not good at chemistry and biology. So that probably wasn't going to work. And no one in my family had gone to college before me, not anybody from either side of my family. And so I think I just figured out a lot of it on my own. Again, not knowing then what I know now, but as I reflect back, it was I just figured it out. And what I learned was I just had to take classes that I liked so that I could have a good GPA and do well in school. Didn't know what I wanted to do because I couldn't be a physical therapist. And so what I found was I just had a lot of credits in psychology and sociology and thought, okay, great. I'll just finish that and that'll be my degree. And I don't know what that means in terms of employment, but at least I'll have a degree and have good grades and I'll be able to graduate and we'll see where that takes us. So I was able to graduate with a pretty nice degree. I had a dual major and then I had no idea what I was going to do with a sociology and psychology degree.
Yeah, that's so me. Thought I wanted to go into healthcare, was in physical therapy, but it was to be a psychologist, psychiatrist. 1 or 2 years in, realized, yep, don't want to be in the medical field, and ended up majoring in psychology. And so I'm feeling a very similar track here between the two of us.
We're not science smart is what I'm learning. We
Yeah.
are not science smart, the two of us.
No, absolutely not. Oh my gosh, I was good in arts, but absolutely, I don't think I passed zoology, and I didn't even take chemistry. But that's too funny. So what was the
Yeah.
pivotal moment where you honed in on like what your career was going to look like in terms of this, going from psychology, majoring in psychology, sociology, to really honing in on your career?
I worked at a grocery store in my summers in high school, and there was a woman who was about a year older than me, who also had a sociology and psychology degree. She went to a different school than I did, but we would talk at work. And when I graduated, I went back to that grocery store that summer, and I said to her, "What are you doing? You have the same degree as me. You're about a year ahead of me. What are you doing?" And this is when, we didn't have online, we couldn't Google search. And she brought a little pamphlet into me at work one day, and it was about a graduate program that she was in for human resources. And at the time, there were only 2 colleges in Pennsylvania that had graduate programs that focused around human resources. And I looked at both of them. One was relatively local. They had a lot of business professionals who taught classes at night. So like not a traditional classroom. It's what we know now for, where adult learners can work all day and then go to school at night. And so that was the program I enrolled in, and it was for a master's degree in human resources. And I didn't even think twice about it. I talked to her that summer. It was too late to enroll for September. So I enrolled in January. So 6 months after I graduated from college, I was going to graduate school at night while I was working. And I can particularly remember, so, as I mentioned, my dad worked at Heinz. It was a unionized factory. He brought me to work one day. I was probably, 22. I was in graduate school, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and had me talk to the head of HR, who tried to talk me out of going into HR. He said, "It is thankless and no one likes you, and there's not a lot of smart people that do it. And you probably shouldn't do it. It's not a great career. It's not a fun career." So I remember specifically, having my conversation with my dad and his friend, the head of HR. And I don't know why I ignored him. I just think I thought, well, I like it and I find it really interesting. I was taking a lot of employment law classes, which I found very, very interesting. I had actually found a quote unquote real job. I wasn't working at the grocery store anymore, and I was working as a recruiter and working as an office manager for a small company. They knew I was in graduate school, so they allowed me to sit in on union negotiations. I was able to do all the recruiting there. They allowed me to sit in on grievance meetings with the union. I was in charge of workers' comp. So this little business owner gave me all the opportunities to sort of hone my skills of the things I was learning at night in graduate school. And I liked it. And so I just continued down that path. And I'm sure we'll get to sort of how I morphed that into where I am today.
Yeah.
But that's how I just sort of really fell into it. I don't know if by accident's really a thing. I think you make decisions in your life that feel right for yourself, and sort of that's why you end up where you are. And so I remember specifically saying, but I like it. I'm going to stick it out here. I really like the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. I have to just unpack that for a second, because you talked about how you went to your dad's company. You had this meeting with the head of HR, and I know very high level about your journey and where you are today and what your mission is with the company that you're running. And I can only think that that conversation was probably one of the best conversations you had, because if he presented to you sort of his perspective of HR in this big company where maybe people weren't, it's very unionized, and the culture of how they treated their people were a certain way. And he was jaded, it sounds like, in terms of how he viewed HR. And so you have this very young, impressionable student who is really interested in the field. And it's You know what? The first thing that popped in my head, it's almost like a bad marriage where, it's sort of like, don't get married. Right.
Right,
And
right,
so he just presented you with
right.
sort of like how miserable he was and how unhappy, and it probably had a direct impact on the culture. And I can only imagine where you probably very subconsciously so told yourself, like, I'm actually going to make something out of this. And it seems like
Mm.
you've been doing that for like the last couple of decades.
Well, that's so interesting. Yeah, that sounds right. And also, if I had to think about it, he was probably 30, 35 years into his career where I am today, frankly.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think he worked there maybe exclusively, and it was about over 1,000 employees, if I remember correctly at the time. Um, Mainly everyone was unionized unless you were a supervisor. And this was in 1991 or 1992. It's a very different world of that industry is a very different world of human resources than working in a non-unionized environment. It's just a different world. But remember, that's what we talked about at the dinner table my whole life growing up, because that's where my dad worked since he was 19 years old. And so that's the only perspective that he knew. And maybe because I had a few other jobs. I mean, I was only 22, but I'd worked at a grocery store. And as I just mentioned, I started working for this small business after college. I at least saw two other places where things weren't always what I heard at the dinner
Hmm.
table. And you're right. And yeah, if you sort of think about what people have said to me my whole career, I think what you're alluding to is people would say to me, "You don't sound like an HR person." And I remember saying, like, I don't really know what that means. I just this sort of makes sense to me. Could we tackle the problem this way? And people would look at me and say, "That's not what an HR person would say." And I would say, "I don't know what that means, but here's my idea." And so perhaps you're right. Maybe that's where it started. But for whatever reason, I just doubled down on I like the work that I'm doing, and thank you for your opinion, but I'm gonna keep
I
going.
love that. So when you look back at your career, where would you say was the moment where you took that sort of entrepreneurial kind of business sense that you have and saw that come to life? And it could be any job that you worked at, but where would you say was, your most memorable moment where that was kind of recognized, whether it was a CEO or your boss?
Yeah. I speak fondly about a job that I had for about 7 years. I worked at a healthcare company, and I speak very fondly about that experience. It was the best and toughest job I ever had. I worked really hard. Um, I remember being there 4 or 5 months looking around thinking, I don't even know why I'm here. I'm like the dumbest person in the
Mm.
room. It was you when you are used to being an all-star on a team and then you get traded and now you're with all-stars and you're like riding the bench. It makes you wonder what you're doing in the room. And that's how I felt. I felt like I was really good at what I did. And now I was working at an organization where everyone was excellent, no matter what their job is, whether it was finance or operations or running the clinic. But my boss at that job told me one time that I was smart. He said, "You are one of the smartest people on my team." And I remember thinking, no one has ever told me that before in my entire life. Now, I felt like I was a pretty good student. I was a good athlete. I think I'm really good with people. I've been quote unquote successful, meaning I did well in school. I got good performance reviews. But no one ever said to me, "You're really smart." And I thought, wow, I guess I am smart. I sort of like needed the external validation from someone who believed that I approached HR in a very different way, i.e., I like to say that I think I'm a pretty good at understanding business. I just happen to be better at sort of the HR overlay in
Mm.
terms of how to make that business successful. And I think those almost 7 years at that healthcare company, I was really given the leverage and the rope to make that job my own and make our business successful through the lens of what I did. As an example, we did, I don't know, 13 or 14 acquisitions in my almost 7 years working there. Interestingly enough, we did lots of union
Mm.
acquisitions. And when the employees became employees of our company, they were non-union, they decertified. I think that says something.
Mm.
Um, and so I think as I look back, that was really the opportunity where I could make that job my own. There wasn't a path. It was sort of a newly created role for an HR professional to come in and support the business. And I think that's where I got my confidence and then my ability to just do what it took to get the job done versus being, bucketed to like HR only does this at companies. It was, yeah, we have a big business to run here. Just go make it happen. Um, and I talk a lot about, I think if had I not worked at that company, I don't think I'd be sitting here today, almost 7 years into running my own business.
Wow, I love that. And I wonder, so when I think about that particular job in general, and you sort of are, navigating your HR career, and you've had a couple of companies, I just wonder, and this question sort of aligns with, I think, the thoughts that a lot of professionals have when they're working in jobs is, when do you recognize it's time to make a switch? Because I think sometimes, you're in this job at this healthcare company, and it sounds like it was the best run that you had. You gained a lot of confidence. You learned a lot. And then, I think oftentimes people are in jobs, and if they're in a job and they realize it's time to make a change, they probably should have made a change 6 months earlier. And people end up getting comfortable, sometimes complacent, which could end up leading to them being riffed if there's a reorganization. And I just wonder if you have any advice to share around, when do you recognize as a professional, like when you're in your jobs, and maybe you can share an example of when you're doing great work, when is the time to take that work and apply it to a bigger opportunity or a new challenge as you're thinking about your career?
Well, I think it depends first on where you are at whatever stage in your life, right? We're at the age now where some of our friends are taking care of aging parents. So they might be empty nesters and aging parents. And if you have something going on in your life, or maybe there's a health scare, that probably isn't the best time for you to change jobs. So I think some people, complacent doesn't seem like a fair word. It almost feels like you're giving in, but there might be some complacency needed because there's something else in your life happening and you just need some stability. And maybe your stability is a job that you love, a job that maybe it's not so challenging, you feel like you've mastered it, but you might need that because of something else happening in your life. So I think that's dependent. But for me, I like to fix things that are broken. And it doesn't mean that I can fix things in 6 months and then I move on to the next. Like at this particular job, I was there almost 7 years. It was a big job. I had, I think it was 6,000 employees under my purview. It was the entire Northeast. I was always on the road. There was lots to do. It took a long time to fix things that were broken. And then the business was constantly evolving. And so how do you do another acquisition and expand your territory? Or do a big acquisition and you spend 6 weeks or 8 weeks in a different city than where you live because you're working on it. For me, I felt like I could still do good work there, but I felt like the new challenges that would come my way would probably be, few and further between, because I felt like I had mastered that job. Again, not perfect. I make mistakes, but I felt like I could do 90% of that job sort of on autopilot. And it was just time. I remember being extremely sad when I gave my resignation. I can remember that day very vividly. It felt like a loss, like a real loss. I had, again, gained my confidence. I felt like I did my best work in my career. At the time, I was probably, maybe 18 or 20 years in. So I was sort of good at my craft and I was just honing new skills there. I had great friends at work. Those people are still my friends to this day. And I've been gone, 13 or 14 years now from that organization. It felt like a huge loss. And I knew it was a good run. I was sad that it was over, but I knew it was time for me to go try something new. And for me, that was that organization was very, very large. I was responsible for HR for the Northeast, but there were 6 other regions in the country and a headquarters, in the out west. I knew that I had reached sort of the pinnacle of the group that I was in. I didn't want to take a job at, quote unquote corporate. I didn't feel like it would be as interesting as being heavily involved in operations, which is really what I loved. And so I decided to go take a run at, the top HR job at a local company, and to prove to myself that I could have, quote unquote, the job, that the buck would stop with me, that no one was above me, that all the decisions were my responsibility. And not to say that, I wanted to wear the crown. It was like, I wanted the challenge of having all the responsibility to be on me so that I can make a really successful HR function at that company.
I love that. Yeah. So you left at the highest point. You accomplished a lot, and I love how you said that this like idea of 90%. I was listening to I don't know, a couple months ago, Tony Robbins was sharing this idea of the 80-20, where when you get to a point in a job, you get so comfortable, you're hitting your stride. It's probably,
Yeah.
3 to 5 years in. And
Yeah.
in theory, you could do the job in 80% of the time. And so what he coaches individuals on is take 20% of the time and figure out what that next thing is going to look like in terms of, like what your next role is going to be. And for you, it sounded like you had your eyes set on a head of HR role, which ultimately you were able to achieve, which I think is fantastic. And you made another point that I just want to hone in on, is this idea of individuals, like people generally are in jobs and they may have family things that happen. Ultimately, it's great if we can find absolute fulfillment in the work that we do and always, sort of strive for that career fulfillment. But we know that there's no linear path from today to get to that point. And life happens. I was coaching or sharing some thoughts with someone about their career, and they want to find that next job, but they are caring for their spouse who is ill. They need the benefits. They need flexibility in work. And it just makes so much sense. And having that stable job while you're taking care of someone in the family, those are real things. So, if you're sitting in a situation right now where you are a little frustrated at work, there may be life that's happening. And I think that, people have to give themselves some grace to realize that, once you get through that, you'll be able to pursue whatever those dreams are that are of interest. So just wanted to, just underscore that. So you were at this role, you're in the head of HR. What challenges did you have? Like when you got to that position and you're the boss and the buck stops with you, what types of challenges did you face in terms of something that's unexpected that you were faced with that maybe you didn't see when you were pursuing the opportunity?
Yeah, I think so. I had two roles after that healthcare run before starting my own business. And I think what I learned is they just weren't the right organizations for me, right? They both needed someone who could fix what I just call like a broken HR function. So how do you take it from a cost center to a value center? There were always costs, payroll, benefits, and workers' comp insurance, et cetera. There's a cost to having an HR function, but the work that the HR team does should add value in other ways: human capital, succession planning, business growth and new markets, et cetera. And both of those organizations said they wanted that. And I believe that they did. I just don't think I was the right person to do it. And so I remember leaving that first job, going to the second, thinking, I don't want to make that mistake. I don't want to start an organization, try to create something, and then 2 years in, decide that wasn't the right place for me. Or perhaps they wanted it to happen on a slower pace than what I was maybe pushing. But what I learned from both of those experiences was to go back to the way I felt when I worked at that healthcare company, which was go find an employer that values someone who thinks about business that just happens to be good at the HR stuff, not go find a good HR leader. Go find that organization, go find a place where you can do maybe one final run. At the time, I probably had, 14 or 15 years left to work. And I wanted to have that same mission and value and purpose and personal growth and professional growth opportunities, and to work with some really interesting, smart people. And that's what I realized I didn't have in those two opportunities. Yes, they were smart people, of course, but it just wasn't the right fit for me. And perhaps maybe businesses I wasn't passionate about, as I think about that also out loud. And I was really longing for that work to feel the connection and the opportunity to really, I think, have my skill set and the function that I could build really shine. And I just don't think those businesses were ready for it at the time.
Yeah, it's almost like a needle in the haystack, which you were looking for. You were looking
Yeah.
for the right industry. You were looking for the right company that really thought about the HR function as a more of a business function in terms of
Yes.
how the people strategy impacted the bottom line, and one that's challenged that allows you to be the entrepreneur that you are. I mean,
Hmm.
are there really companies that exist? If they are, it is few and far between. And it's almost
Agreed.
like if you do all of your due diligence, you go through the interviewing process and you feel like this could be the one, and then you start, and there's almost a dose of reality that hits you after you probably like a couple of days in realize, yep, this is not the one. And
Right.
then, in the back of your mind, you're saying to yourself, I might as well just do this myself, which is launching your business.
Yeah.
And we know that that's the path that you took. And I wonder, what was the catalyst for you that was like the aha moment that, that the corporate world wasn't the world for you? And I'm going to use the clocking out because it's fitting here, because it's essentially you had to, it's interesting because at Heinz, 50 years, those union employees clocked in and clocked out, and your dad did it, and you
Yeah.
were on a pathway to having a 50-year HR run, but you decided at some point, you're like, no, this is not for Shelly Azen. I'm going to make a change. I'm going to go into a different direction. So tell us about the catalyst that got you there.
Yeah, so that second job I just mentioned, we were our parent company spun off our business, and all but two executives, including myself, were let go. Just downsizing. So I had an opportunity to have outplacement assistants. Had a phenomenal outplacement coach, and I always tell the story this way, which is, it's like sort of work therapy. She would say, just tell me about your career. Like, I think that's what she said to me. She said, start from the beginning and tell me about your career. And we had, as I recall, maybe 3 1-hour sessions. And I just started to build on where I worked, what I did there, why I chose to go somewhere else, et cetera. And then at the end of, as I recall, the third session, she said, okay, well, what are you going to do next? And I thought, well, I'm just going to Google like best places to work because I should work there. I'm a pretty talented person. I want to work with like other, all-star players. And as I Googled it in the Philadelphia market, they were very, very large, what I would interpret as very large. My assumption is extremely bureaucratic organizations. And she said, okay, let's assume you get the job. And what are you going to do on Monday at lunchtime? And I said, what do you mean? And she said to me, you're going to hate it there. I listened to you talk for 3 sessions on what you've done in your career. And you use different words, but what you said to me was you fixed things that were broken. That's what I heard you say. That was the theme and the thread of your entire success at your career. And she said, Shelly, that's what consultants do. And I remember there just being silence on the phone. I'm thinking, well, number one, what she said and repeated back to me is correct. I did fix a lot of broken things. And I like to think that I had HR add value to a business other than just being a cost center for a variety of ways. And then I said, you're right. Okay, now what do I do? And then we just started to talk about like, how do you, as they say, hang out your own shingle? Like, what does that mean? Get an EIN, find a lawyer. And let's just start to think about what would an ideal client look like. And so we started to have those conversations. And I remember not being afraid and not thinking, what am I doing? So we had a couple of conversations. And then I remember calling a good friend of mine. And I said, I'm thinking about doing this. Do you think I'm crazy? What if I don't get any work? And she said, if you don't get any work, a company would be lucky to have you as a head of HR. Maybe that wouldn't give you fulfillment, but a company would be lucky to have you. You would do good work there. You'd earn a paycheck. I know you'd make a difference. But if that's the worst thing, if that's your downfall, if like things don't work out as a consultant, if you could go find a great job as a head of HR, like, is that really a bad thing? And I thought, she's right. I'm just going to go take a run at it. And I remember never being afraid. I had great people along the way who gave me bits of advice. And I just started. And the outplacement coach was great. It was the end of August, and I decided I was going to give this a shot. And it was about to be Labor Day. And at the time I had moved into a brand new development. So all my neighbors and I were all new neighbors, and we were having a barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the coach saying to me, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, I'm not going to that barbecue. And she said, why not? And I thought, everyone's going to say, hi, what's your name? What do you do for a living? And I'm going to say, hi, I'm Shelly and I'm unemployed. Like, I'm just not going to put myself in that position. And she said, why don't you practice? Why don't you say, hi, I'm Shelly, I'm a consultant and I look for clients who need X, and let's fill in that blank for you. And just start saying that at that barbecue. Because what will happen is if you say, I work in HR consulting and my best clients are X, people start to think, I know someone that I can introduce her to. Just start trying it. And I did. It allowed me to get comfortable with saying I do my own thing, and here are types of clients I look for. If you know anybody, that'd be great. What do you do for a living? Nice to meet you, Raymond. Right. And so like, she really helped me get comfortable with how I could talk about it and then how I start to look for clients.
Shelly, I absolutely love that. You just described the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, where the fixed mindset would have been going to the barbecue and saying, I'm an HR person, I was recently let go, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I have X amount of years experience, and this is who I am. Can you help me network? Versus you took the growth mindset and you leaned into this new identity of a consultant. It was a little risky, right? You went in there, you were shifting your identity, you were taking a risk, and it probably wasn't perfect in terms of how you represented yourself as a consultant, but you learned from the pitch that you made and you honed those skills. And I love that. And I the other thing that I want to say is that when you're in a position where a position's being eliminated, I'm sure that you had some sort of emotional process that you had to sort through that was somewhat challenging, that you had to overcome this sort of hurdle where you felt like, I can be a business owner. I think the other, what I see is sometimes people who are in a career, they may decide that I want to start a company, I want to be a consultant, and they leave the company on their own terms to do that. But the fact that you were in a position where you were provided some severance and some outplacement, you had a coach, and you sort of had to, one, navigate the process of, okay, I was just let go and having to kind of deal with some of that. But then at the same time, being open to the possibility of a complete career change, which takes a lot of courage. And I just wonder, as you think back, where did the strength come from for you to overcome those two sort of hurdles?
Yeah, I never thought about it that way. I think, personally, I was very unhappy in that job. So maybe even just relief that the job was over. In full disclosure, I was looking because I was really personally unhappy there. I felt very thwarted and that I couldn't really try to make happen what I thought I was being hired to do. And I just felt like I was always being quieted. And it was very, very challenging. And so reflecting back on what I really loved about that healthcare company, I think that was sort of my barometer of like what a great employer-employee relationship can look like. Interestingly enough, I interviewed to go back there for a different role and I was rejected, which I think is very interesting because I was really successful there. I did a very good job. It was a different department that I worked in a little sort of part-time and did some ad hoc projects when I was employed. But as I look back now, like what a gift that was to be rejected and not, maybe that was my thoughts of like a safety net. But what I realized, to go back to your question, what I realized is I was so personally unhappy. And I think in working with my coach, I was able to verbalize what I really wanted out of work going forward, whatever that looked like, what I was going to look for in a new employer or in work. And when she and I talked about working for myself, I really then started to think, what kind of work makes me happy? What kind of projects will make me happy? And then how do I go find that? And that's how I started to focus on, what we now call business development as a business owner. But it was like, how do I go find projects that I know I'm really good at, that I know companies probably need support with? And then how do I go find those? Because that will then give me the fulfillment that I was longing for. What I also learned was I really missed, and I still do 7 years later, I haven't solved for this and that's okay, which is like, I miss being part of an intact team. People that you get to know when you come to work every morning, you get a cup of coffee at the same time in the break room. You might see each other, grabbing a bite to eat at the local restaurant right down the street from the office. Like, I miss those intact relationships that you build over time when you work with someone day in and day out. I still miss it. I'm hired often for 6 weeks or sometimes up to a year on certain clients, depending on the project. So you do develop those relationships. And then, like, when the contract's over, they're pretty much gone. And then you have to start again. So that's one aspect of the role that I still miss, but it's okay. I mean, I feel like I established great relationships with my clients. I think I'm pretty good at doing it quickly. I think that's good for rapport building. But that's one aspect that I've come to really miss. So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, I love that. And so how did you come up with the name?
Yeah, I did not come up with the name. So I hired what I think is a great marketing company. And I said to him a couple of things. I don't want to use my name as like Shelly Azen Consulting. Number one, no one knows how to pronounce my last name. And so I don't want to have to go through people pronouncing it wrong more than they already do in the course of my life. And I feel like sometimes when people are in transition, they do consulting, which they need to do to survive, to put food on the table and make money for their families. And then they ultimately get another full-time job. I didn't want people to think that the perception of this is just an interim thing. And so I felt like using my name even as would give the perception it was interim. So I went to this marketing company to help me with my webpage. And I told them what I just told you. And the guy said, I know nothing about HR. Tell me about what you do. And he had a little notebook and he was taking notes. And we had one or two conversations. And I wanted to use the word like RE, like reinventing HR, reimagining, or re-something. And every word was already trademarked, or was already a book that was already written, or it's used by some other company. And then I finally said, you know what, this is what I'm paying you for. You help me figure it out, right? And so we had a meeting and he pulled out his notebook that he always had at our meetings. And he said to me, have you heard of the word Trivago, right? There were all these commercials on Trivago is like a travel website you can log on to and book, vacations. And I said, of course. And he said, well, Trivago is not really a word. It's a made up word. Like TRA means travel. And I forget the rest. And he said, what if we did something for you? And I said, sure. And he turned his notebook over. And on the first day, as I started talking, he wrote down unHR, like unlike your typical HR person, unlike what you know about HR, unlike the results you typically have gotten from HR. And we've had several conversations and he had notes, down the page on the next page. That was the first thing he wrote down when I started talking to him. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. And so that's really, so Josh gets all the credit, not me. I didn't come up with the name, but I like it. There are days I think about changing it because I don't want to offend HR people by the title, meaning sometimes you have to do the opposite of what you're used to HR doing to make it more successful or hone the skill set. But I get lots of feedback that people like it, and I think people understand it when they read it, and that's sort of the point. So,
yeah, I love that you didn't just come up with a generic consulting name. I think that makes a ton of sense how you described when you're in career transition, hanging up a shingle does come across as a temporary thing.
Yeah, of course.
And I think the takeaway here is that you really put an investment into the brand, that there was a thought behind what the brand stands for. And I was looking at the website and I saw in quotes, people chaos. And I can't help but think about how you take a very chaotic situation and you make sense of it. You're a problem solver. And today, so many companies are chaotic. Like, I feel like there's just, the world is your oyster when it comes to chaos in terms of what companies are experiencing, high levels of turnover because there's a, unhealthy culture where people can't show up and be their most authentic selves when they come to work. And so this idea of unHR, it's very disruptive, but when you're trying to make a splash in a very saturated industry, I feel like everyone's a consultant. Everyone's doing management consulting, business coaching, not even just HR consulting, but you're going in and working with the CEO of the company to help them minimize the chaos that exists within the people that work for the company. And if I were CEO, I would say, yes, we need to undo this shit today. And you're going to be the person that's going to help. I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I love how you describe like what is unHR. And you kind of have this little on your website, how you help people pronounce your last name, which I think is a really nice sort of, you're taking the brand and weaving it through your messaging on the website. And so I think here, if you're going to be starting a company, don't do it half-ass, right? You really need to be thoughtful about, I'm building a company, I'm building a brand, and it sounds like you put a lot of thought into it, and it really stands for who you are as a person. And I can't help but go back to that conversation with that HR person, which wasn't you, and you're really just making this your own. And so, any comments about that?
Yeah, I think, as I said, maybe when we started this conversation, was people used to say to me, "You don't talk like an HR person." And what I came to learn as I look back is, I spoke the language of the business. I would always hang out with the head of operations, be like, "Can I ride along with you today?" Earlier in my career, I worked at a company that had a warehouse and distribution center, so I wanted to work shifts in the warehouse. So I understood how our company worked. Right. And he would look at me and say, "What are you doing out here?" And I would say, like, "I don't know what happens out here. So how am I supposed to be good at my job if I don't know what happens in the warehouse and how the product gets to the truck?" And he was like, "Okay." Right. And so like that was, no one told me to do that. I just thought, if I don't know what happens out in this warehouse, I don't know how to do a good job making sure I purchase the right benefits for the employees and making sure I understand I could recruit people the right way. And that just seemed very natural to me. And so, again, sort of undo what people thought HR was, right? If you think back to what you just said. And so I think you're right. My advice to someone, and I get calls from people a lot who say, like, "Can I pick your brain? I'm thinking about being a consultant. What do you think?" I just always say to people, just go after what you're good at. Like, there's a director in Hollywood. Her name's Ava DuVernay, and I love her quote. I saw her speak once, and she said, "When you're in your own lane, there is no traffic." Right. So like you and I could both be HR consultants. You could be really good at something I don't like to do. And I could be really good at something that you don't like to do. And we both can still have a lot of abundant work. And we can maybe share clients. You can work on one aspect that I'm not good at, and I can work on the other. And so I learned, just be really, really good at what you do. Talk about how you're good at what you do, and just go find those clients. And I think just be comfortable with that. Right. And don't worry what everyone else is doing in your space. I think I fell into the trap early on. I'd see people posting on LinkedIn, other business owners, and particularly HR consultants, what they're doing. And I would think, "Oh my God, should I be doing that? I didn't do that. Should I go to that meeting? I didn't go to that meeting." It doesn't matter. That works for them. Do what works for you, and just continue to hone and be good at what you're really good at, and then sell that to your clients. You'll find a market for who needs what you need. And I think the other thing for me, and maybe this might be true of other business professionals who had a traditional corporate career who might want to be a consultant. What I would say is, I am not embarrassed about my success. I'm proud of what I've accomplished. Again, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes all the time. I still make mistakes every day, but I'm proud of what I accomplished, and I'm not embarrassed to speak about it. And you can talk about yourself in a way that gives a potential client comfort to know that you are an expert in that space. And I think the other thing that differentiates a person who comes from corporate to consulting is, I had that job. I had that job for 27 years. I started at the bottom and I worked my way up. But for 27 years, I worked in an HR department inside a company. A lot of consultants can't say that. They start their job as consultants, and that's great. And I'm sure they're very talented and very successful. But what differentiates me from those consultants is, I've had that job. I've had to sit in front of board members and the CEO and employees and the other, my peers at a company, understanding the day in and day out role of an HR executive. Consultants who don't have that job don't know what it's like. And so I think my experience, having had that job for 27 years, also comes through. Like, I know what it's like to restructure benefits. I know what it's like to implement an HR system and make sure no one's paycheck can be wrong. It cannot be off by one penny on that first payroll. I feel that pain as a former head of HR. And I, as a consultant, can talk about those experiences and make sure you understand. I understand that pain, and I'll make sure it doesn't happen. And so that's my other advice. So don't worry about whatever other people are doing. Hone your craft, and then, use to your advantage the fact that you have that job for 27 years where you're now going to be a fractional support or a consultant for that business.
I love that. So what is your next, you've been doing this for 7 years now. You're a fastest growing company. You obviously are, I feel like you're hitting your stride. Are there other things that are goals of yours in terms of, stepping out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about, and people ask me, like, do you want to build a company? Do you want to have 5 or 6 or 10 consultants working with you? And I did have 2 people on payroll at one point, and when those folks decided to move on and do something else, I didn't replace them. I just thought what really gives me satisfaction at this stage of my life is working with great clients and doing good work. And yes, I have a couple of consultants that I've worked with over the years. So if I get 2 or 3 or 4 clients that want work, I can give some work to them, and they work under the unHR umbrella. But I think at this point, I just want to continue to do really good work. I found myself working with a lot of healthcare clients, which may not surprise you based on this conversation. And I love it. And I feel like I can still make an impact to organizations where, because I'm not a smart science person, I can't be a healthcare provider, but I can provide great experiences to those companies from an HR perspective so that they can take really good care of their patients. And so for me, it's just continuing to do more of that, more of the same.
I love that. You're finding your sweet spot, and you're in your lane, you're in your comfort zone. When I say comfort zone, you've sort of honed your business on the size that you want it to be, and you're making a great impact. I feel like the verticalizing of your business in healthcare is really smart, because you can't be this, the consulting company to every size, every industry. And so you're creating a niche that you're able to add value. And within that industry, you're, sort of creating a value proposition that's specific to healthcare, which isn't like other HR consulting companies that are out there. So you're becoming the unHR for healthcare. So tell us, as we wrap up here, how can people find you?
You can go to my website, which is un-hr.com. My email address and phone number is out there, or else you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Sweet. Well, Shelly, I can't believe we're already at an hour. It's been just such a great conversation. I loved getting to know you more. I mean, I feel like this idea of the Philadelphia, Pittsburgh thing, you and I are going to have to get back to Pittsburgh together and potentially go to a game. Really enjoyed, the conversation, and just really nice, great success that you're having, and really appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks. First of all, thank you again for the invite. I appreciate it. And you will never have to ask me twice to go to a Steeler game. So anytime you're ready, I'll be happy to go.
That's great. Sounds great. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and leadership development services. You can learn more about Career Minds at careerminds.com. If you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well as on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your career or future and think it's time for a change, ask yourself these 3 simple questions. Does my work or career make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and others? Until next time.